Why doesn't the Antichrist die when he enters the temple's Holy of Holies? A question that often gets asked is just this: why doesn't the Antichrist die when he enters the holy place at the Abomination of Desolation? The high priests were always at risk when they entered the holy place and had to take numerous precautions when they entered on the Day of Atonement. You know, the one day a year when any living human was allowed to enter it. And these guys were relatively righteous. Yet we're told in Matthew 24:15 that we will see the Abomination of Desolation standing in the holy place. And in 2 Thessalonians 2:3-4, we learn the man of sin sits in the holy place. And apparently, in both cases, he doesn't die. Why is that? You have probably heard that according to tradition, people would tie a rope around the priest's ankle before he went into the Holy of Holies, thereby allowing his body to easily be removed if he did die. Now, there's no biblical record of such a rope or a high priest actually dying, but in Exodus 28:35, Aaron, who was the first high priest, was commanded to wear special bells on his priestly vestment so that the sound of the bells could be heard when he entered and exited the holy place, quote, that he may not die. Also in Leviticus 10, Aaron's sons, the priests, Nadab and Abihu, were actually consumed with fire, though they were probably outside the tabernacle at the time. And there was a Jewish legend in the Mishnah about a Sadducee that died in the Holy of Holies, as mentioned in Yoma 19b. There was an incident involving a certain Sadducee who was appointed as high priest, who prepared the incense outside and then brought it into the Holy of Holies. The sages said not even a few days passed until he died and was laid out in the garbage dump in punishment for his actions. Also in Yoma 70a, it was recorded that the high priest would celebrate when he came out of the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement, unscathed. So the fear of dying was very real in the minds of the priests during the Second Temple. But again, we have to ask, why doesn't the Antichrist die when he enters the holy place in the end times? In 3rd Maccabees, a non-canonical book of Jewish history, Ptolemy, the king of Egypt, decided to tour Palestine. Upon arriving in Jerusalem, he went to the Jerusalem temple and decided to exercise his right as king, which he thought allowed him to enter any place that he wanted, anywhere in his kingdom. He decided he was going into the temple, and the priests began to protest and pray. Soon the people were rioting in the streets and doing the same. The arrogant king stepped forward and tried to enter the holy place. At the very last moment, however, an invisible force prevented the king from going forward. In fact, he was tossed from side to side, and he lay helpless on the ground, not able to move or speak. His bodyguards hastened to revive him. This frightened everybody. So there is at least a lot of anecdotal evidence about people having problems entering the holy place, and there being a lot of fear that something was going to happen if they did. But you know, later unclean people did enter the Holy of Holies and live. In 169 BC, Antiochus Epiphanes, the Seleucid king, entered the sanctuary and took the golden altar of incense, the golden menorah, the table of showbread, as well as the veil of the Holy of Holies. Then in 167 BC, he desecrated the temple when he erected a statue of Zeus on the altar. It is very likely that either he or someone else entered the Holy of Holies at that time. And in 63 BC, it said the Roman general Pompey desecrated the temple by brazenly entering the Holy of Holies. So why didn't any of these guys die? Let's explain that idea. The holy place is the Holy of Holies, where the Spirit of God dwelt in Solomon's temple. The high priest was able to enter once a year, after he had prepared and been properly cleansed according to what the Torah said, and then he could enter and make atonement for the entire nation. The reason why it was a death sentence to enter in any other way or at any other time was because of the holiness of God, and in the presence of God, an unclean being just simply can't survive. They would die. But the presence of God left the temple prior to the Babylonian invasion. Then the glory of the Lord departed from the threshold of the temple and stood over the cherubim. And the cherubim lifted their wings and mounted up from the earth in my sight. When they went out, the wheels were beside them, and they stood at the door of the east gate of the Lord's house, and the glory of the Lord of Israel was above them. Ezekiel 10:18 through 19. We have no record of that presence ever returning. And the fact that there was no Ark of the Covenant present after that supports that thought as well. And, of course, we know in Matthew 23 that when Jesus called out woes upon the Pharisees, he declared the temple desolate until they acknowledge him as a Messiah by saying, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." And that God really left the temple that day by Jesus walking out of it. So in our opinion, there was no godly presence in the Holy of Holies for Antiochus or Pompey to encounter. In addition, we know that at Pentecost, after Jesus' ascension, the Holy Spirit entered believers and we became the temple of God, or a better translation, the dwelling place of God. So the Spirit of God does not dwell in a physical temple anymore. It dwells in you and I as believers. The Holy Spirit is within Christians. The reason we don't die in the presence of that Spirit within us is because we've been cleansed by Jesus' blood. We've been made a holy vessel worthy of the Spirit. Okay, so let's get back to that original question about the Antichrist and why he doesn't die in the Holy of Holies. The answer is the same as Pompey and Antiochus. The presence of God isn't going to be there. The Holy of Holies in that future third temple is just going to be any old room. And if there is a third temple, it will just be a building. Those who build it, the Jews in Jerusalem, will think it is a holy temple and that the Spirit of God will inhabit it, but they will be wrong. The Spirit isn't going to be there. The animal sacrifices the Jews will perform outside the temple are going to be blasphemous. Jesus died once for all. All sacrifices for sin there on the Temple Mount will be a rejection of Jesus' blood as the only true atonement. We'll be carrying that blasphemous animal blood into the Holy of Holies, at least for a time. The temple may look like a holy temple, but that third temple is just going to be a building, one used for blasphemous purposes, almost like a Hindu temple or a Buddhist temple. And thus the Holy Spirit will not be present. Let me say that again. God, the Holy Spirit, will not be present in that temple. But here is the important part. The Jews who will build that building won't know that. And the Muslims won't know that. The Muslims accept the Torah as divine revelation, so it's likely, although they oppose the temple right now, they will accept the temple as well later on. And the sad part is that, many people attending Christian churches will think it is a holy temple as well. They won't realize that the Spirit of God isn't in that temple. So all three of these groups will expect anyone entering the Holy of Holies, other than the high priest and other on the Day of Atonement, they're going to expect that person to die. So when the Antichrist does enter the holy place, likely on a Passover, everyone in these groups will be absolutely shocked when he doesn't die. He, of course, will say he didn't die because he's God and not a normal mortal human. The fact that he doesn't die is going to confirm this in the minds of everyone watching who has been deceived in this way. This will likely deceive billions. It will be one of the major proofs the Antichrist uses to make the claim that he is God. This deception will work because so many will be thinking you can't enter the Holy of Holies and live. Another possible fake proof that the Antichrist might use will be if he sits on the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant. Now, the Ark of the Covenant is another item that, if touched, would lead to death. In 2 Samuel 6:1-7, as the ark was being transported, the oxen pulling the cart stumbled, and it looked like the ark was going to fall. So a man named Uzzah took hold of the ark to steady it, but the power of the ark struck him down, and Uzzah died. This vast power is why the ark was carried by poles. No human could touch it. So it's our theory that it is possible, if not likely, that an Ark of the Covenant will be found, placed in the Holy of Holies, and that when the Antichrist enters that room, the Holy of Holies, he will sit on it, sit on God's throne, so to speak. We know from 2 Thessalonians 2:3-4 that we already mentioned that the man of sin is going to take his seat in the holy place of God. So what is he going to sit on? Possibly the ark, or more likely a copy of the ark. In both Revelation 11 and Revelation 15, we see the Ark of the Covenant is in heaven, in the heavenly temple. So there's only one way then that the real ark could be on the earth for the Antichrist to sit on, and then also later be in heaven. That is, if Jesus carries the Ark of the Covenant back up into heaven when he ascends prior to the seventh trumpet. However, the Bible doesn't record anything about an event like that. So our current opinion, the current opinion of our ministry, is that if the Ark of the Covenant is found on earth, it's going to be likely a fake. However, this doesn't mean Israel won't celebrate finding it and thinking that it's real and treat it like it's real. Just like the Holy of Holies, they will likely be deceived by a fake ark. There may actually even be a third way that the Antichrist will deceive on that Abomination of Desolation day. We know from Revelation 13:13 that a character known as the false prophet is going to call down fire from heaven in the sight of all people to deceive them into worshiping the Antichrist. Now, is this just going to be a random calling down of fire? Or is it a specific act on that day, the Abomination of Desolation's day? The calling down of fire upon a sacrifice, happened multiple times in the Old Testament to signify that a sacrifice was acceptable to God. The most famous is when Elijah had a contest with the prophets of Baal to see who could call down fire on their sacrifice. As we know from 2 Kings 17, Elijah was the only one to call down fire, and the people of Israel then killed the 400 prophets of Baal right after that. Other famous individuals calling down fire on a sacrifice were Solomon, who sacrificed before the brand newly built temple of God had fire come down on it from heaven to sanctify it, in 2 Chronicles 7:1. And when David brought the first sacrifice upon the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite in 1 Chronicles 21:26. So will the false prophet call down fire on the day of the Abomination of Desolation to dedicate the sacrifices to the Antichrist and not God? And will he use this fire that he calls down from heaven to further deceive the people? This ministry thinks it very, very likely. So if all these things happen, the Antichrist will have a bunch of things happening and going his way at the Abomination of Desolation that will deceive many. He will enter the holy place and not die. And he may sit on an Ark of the Covenant copy and not die. And almost assuredly, the false prophet will call down fire from heaven in front of everyone who's watching. This will be shocking to religious Jews, Muslims, and many churchgoers, and so be a great source of deception. This deception would be made even stronger if someone, possibly a Jewish priest, were first to accidentally touch the ark or enter the Holy of Holies and in fact die. I can see Satan arranging some kind of trick in advance to strengthen the deception. Then everyone's mind would be thinking that no one could survive touching these things. These are the kind of things we should be looking for and not be taken in by deception should we live to see these things. But if the presence of the Holy Spirit isn't in the temple, what is desolated by this act? It's called the Abomination of Desolation after all. If it isn't the presence of the Holy Spirit leaving, what does leave? What is desolated? Click right here to discover what is desolated by this horrible abomination by the Antichrist. Till then, this is Nelson. and I'll see you there.